The question we're asking today is, do mobility exercises work? Now, they can and they can't. It all depends on how you do them. So what we're going to be learning about today, first of all, what is mobility? Then muscle mobility physiology, tight muscle physiology, and then finally we're going to look at the 3 steps that I recommend for more joint mobility. If you are struggling with your mobility, you want to improve it, please do click the link below, go through to my 2-hour face-to-face how to improve mobility workshop. So number one, what is mobility? Well, mobility is the range of movement at a joint, and it's not just flexibility of a muscle. So what you can see here is obviously me doing a front squat. Now a front squat requires almost complete overall body or adequate mobility, because we need to be able to get the knees forward, which requires the ankles to be mobile enough. We need to be able to obviously get the hips down, which require good hip mobility. We need to be able to keep the chest up and the elbows up, which require good sort of thoracic spine and shoulder mobility as well. Now, obviously, we're just going to be focusing on the hip area within this tutorial, but what we're looking at is multiple muscles around that area, not just, say, the hamstrings need to be flexible. It's much more than that. So if we first look at a muscle, and we'll talk about what mobility is within this muscle, and then that obviously extrapolates out into all the muscles and then therefore the joint. Well, as you can see, we're going to sort of break it down. We've got the muscle, which is surrounded by fascia. Now each of these layers has a fascia around them, and fascia goes within these layers as well. Then it comes down to a fascicle. So as you can see here, we've got the entire muscle here. The epimysium is the fascia that goes around it. Then you've got these fascicles that create the entire muscle. That has another fascial sheath called the perimysium. Then what we get that make up these fascicles are muscle fibers. So we get the muscle fibers here. And these are the individual muscle fibers that go around. These also have a fascial sheath called the endomysium. Now the important bit here that we need to get to, which we're going to talk about next, are muscle spindles. Now muscle spindles essentially detect the changes in length at a muscle fibre. So if a muscle won't go any further, it's because the muscle spindle is telling it not to, and that's going to become important in a minute. Then what we get are the sarcomeres. So these are the actual contractile parts of the muscle. So you can see here you've got a sarcomere, which is basically made up of a thick and thin filament. So if we just break it up, so we've got here, we've got the thin filament here, we've then got the thick filament in the middle, which is here. So these are the bits that basically move. So the sarcomere moves away from each other, or these thin filaments move away from each other, and then they can move towards each other, and that's the muscle getting longer and shorter. And how long they can get is dictated by these muscle spindles. So the flexibility of a muscle and the range of movement at a joint is essentially dictated by these muscle spindles for various different reasons. We won't go into all those reasons, but we're going to try and focus on a couple of narrow ones. So the tight muscle physiology, as we've mentioned, we've got these muscle spindles. Now they are dictating the length of the muscle fibre, or allowing how far they will go apart. So as you can see here, you've got contracted muscle fibre. So it's got short, and then it's got long. So as you can see, these muscle spindles essentially wrap around a muscle fibre. And what they're doing is they're basically looking at how far apart, like the coils of a spring, how far apart are the different parts of the muscle and the muscle spindle. So basically the spring coils tighter when it's contracted, and when it's relaxed or lengthened or stretched, these coils get further apart, if you can imagine. And essentially it's just dictating and understanding the distance within the muscle spindle. Now this is something to do with what the brain's telling the muscle to do. So what we basically need to do to gain more mobility and gain more range of movement at a joint is override these muscle spindles. Now, muscle spindles can create and help create muscle knots, more globally muscle spasms, but they can also be caused by fatigue to a muscle as well. Because as you can see here, we've got muscle fibers, so you can see normal length to muscle fibers there. So you've got a healthy muscle fiber, then you've got a contracted knot. That's essentially the muscle spindle has contracted together there. And you can see it here, you can see it here, you can see it here. So these are just individual little muscle knots, and this is if you're getting a massage, you'll feel a thumb or a hand or whatever, it'll be going along smoothly and then it'll jump over a muscle knot. If you've got a muscle spasm, that's just happened more globally throughout the muscle. So it's a bit more looking at the entire muscle. And then obviously fatigue, if your muscle's fatigue and it's perceiving instability around a joint or potential instability around a joint, it will contract and create the muscle spasm or the muscle knot where it sees fit. So essentially what I'm talking about is overriding these muscle spindles to be able to get the muscle longer. So when we talk about the process, which we're going to do in a second, that's what we're going to be focusing on. So how do we do it? Step number 1, massage / foam roll. You've got to think of your muscle like a stick of chewing gum. So you can see the stick of chewing gum here. It's come out of the wrapper. Now, if I was to put my thumb and finger on either end of this and pull it apart, because it's stiff, it's either not going to move, and when it does move, it's going to snap, because there's not a great deal of flexibility or suppleness within the chewing gum. If I then go about chewing it for a minute or two, what will happen is the chewing gum will become a lot more pliable and supple, and I'll be able to pull it and it will just stretch. So that's what we need to be able to do, first of all, to allow the muscle to stretch, to go beyond what the muscle spindles are allowing it to do. So first of all, we've just got to calm the muscle spindles down and not make them so spasmodic or like reactionary. So first of all, as you can see here, I'm just rolling the gluteal group. So with regards to a front squat, that is the main area to go for. You can go rectus femoris, you can go sort of the TFL on the anterior part of the hip as well. So essentially we go all round the hip. We could then go psoas, iliacus, obviously harder to roll but easier to stretch. So we need to go around all these different muscles and open them out, get the muscle spindles calm, which then lead us on to step number 2, which is the stretching part. This is there to lengthen the muscle to override previous muscle spindle length. So when you get to a certain range, the muscle spindle will stop it at a certain point. What we've then got is the foam rolling, which is there to calm them down. Then we can go about stretching them beyond that previous length. And we do that using either static or dynamic stretches. I know dynamic stretches are more fashionable these days, but there is nothing wrong with a good static stretch. And as you can see here, I'm just doing sort of a raised glute stretch, which again is getting the gluteal group around here. So I would go about, first of all, massaging or rolling them. Then I would go about stretching them to take them beyond the length that they are previously used to. And then finally, I need to take them into a new position, which is where the movement comes in. Now this could be done by sort of what is described as mobility exercise, or by the exercise itself. Essentially what we need to do is teach the brain this new range of movement, because before it was perceiving it either couldn't go there or it didn't want to go there. But now we've calmed the muscle spindles down, we've then opened them out into a larger range. What we then do is move into that range. And then what this is then doing is a process called myelination. So myelination is essentially the nervous system learning a new habit, or the central nervous system learning a new habit. And what it's basically telling the brain is, I can go further. And then it's reinforcing that. The more you repeat the movement, the more you repeat the range of movement that you can go to, the more the nerve pathway myelinates and allows it to go there. And then what that's also doing is allow the muscle to perceive stability. So if your body was perceiving a problem before, what you're doing is you're basically calming the muscle spindles down, lengthening them, and then moving them into that new range of movement that it was once perceiving unstable, and allowing it to perceive stability. So Either way, we're gaining that range of movement. So what we need to be able to do is in the move section is essentially what we're doing is teaching the brain through myelination and repetition, which is essentially what myelination works off, and then allowing the muscle to perceive new stability and then improving that range of movement. So to quickly summarize what we've learned today is what is mobility? It's the range of movement at a joint, not just the flexibility of the muscle. Then we've looked at muscle mobility physiology, and we've talked about these muscle spindles and what they are doing. They are basically detecting the length of a muscle, and if a muscle isn't going any longer or joint isn't going any further, it's because the muscle spindles aren't allowing it to. So when we come on to tight muscle physiology, these muscle spindles are creating knots, overall muscle spasms, which is overall muscle tension. And then how we override that is with 3 steps, which is essentially massaging the area, stretching the area, and then moving the area into the new range of movement where we want to take it. If you've enjoyed this tutorial, hit the like button. If you've learned something new, hit the thanks button. If you want to watch more of these types of tutorials, hit the subscribe button. And if you have a question or a comment, please do leave it below in the comment section.